I drew a chalk line on the sidewalk outside my apartment on a Tuesday because the morning felt like a wrinkled shirt. Sacramento's summer light bounced off the windows like someone had polished the whole block. I had a stub of blue chalk left over from labeling storage bins, so I bent down and drew a line across the concrete, straight as I could. Next to it, I wrote, "Stand here if you need a tiny win." Then I drew an arrow. I didn't expect anything. I figured the sun would rub it out by lunch, or the sprinklers would do the job. I walked back upstairs, made coffee, and watched from the window like a kid who'd set a trap for a cartoon rabbit. A mail carrier stopped first. He read the words, looked up at my building, then put both feet on the line. He lifted his cap, let the breeze hit his head, and smiled like he'd been told a joke in a language he still understood. He took a deep breath and moved on. That alone felt like enough, so I raised my mug to the window. Then a woman in a pink visor stepped into place and stretched her calves like she was at a starting line. She whispered something to herself and jogged away. The line began to collect little moments. A dog sat exactly on it, tail sweeping chalk dust, while his owner texted. A man with a briefcase stepped onto it and checked his tie in the reflection of a minivan. A kid tried to tightrope walk along it, arms out like a gull. I was supposed to be answering emails, but instead I kept leaning to the glass, memorizing the way people stood. Some were quick taps, like touching a lucky sign before a game. Others lingered, breathing, almost prayerful. At lunch I bought fresh chalk at the corner store. The cashier looked at me like I might be starting a mural. I wanted to say, "No, it's smaller than that," but I just paid and walked back. I added a second line and wrote, "Take 3 slow breaths." Then, below it, add a word if you like. I left a piece of chalk on the curb. The first word appeared within an hour, courage. The second, taxes, which made me laugh. Someone crossed out taxes and wrote patience, which made me laugh harder. I wasn't trying to change the city. I liked the city as it was. Trees with deep roots, trains humming through at odd hours, the smell of tomatoes in late July. But I was tired of treating every day like a tunnel I had to speed through just to reach evening. The lines were an excuse to notice people, and in noticing them, I felt the day loosen. By Friday, the chalk spot had a rhythm. Some people knew it. They beelined over like regulars. A teenage boy in a hoodie wrote tryouts in tiny letters and erased it, then wrote tryouts again, bigger. A nurse placed a coffee cup at the curb like an offering, then picked it up and sipped with a grin. I added a prompt. What's something small you're proud of? The answers showed up like short songs. Folded laundry, called grandma, watered basil. 2 pages, made peace. One old man came every afternoon with a small brush, the kind you'd use on shoes. He smoothed the chalk dust in gentle circles, pushing it into a soft haze. He never wrote anything. He just tended it like a garden. I started to feel protective, like the spot belonged to our block. I swept leaves in the morning, added a fresh piece of chalk, and checked the weather app like the chalk was a picnic I'd invited clouds to. On Saturday, I made a sign out of cardboard and string. It said Sidewalk Museum, admission, a memory. I hung it on the fence by the maple tree. No security guards, no gift shop, just concrete and whatever we decided to put on it. I added arrows that said entrance and exit. And for some reason that structure made people braver, as if they had paid for a ticket and now needed to get their money's worth. A dad wrote, first bike ride, Curtis Park, 1998. A woman in a business skirt wrote, blueberry pancakes on Pine Street, then drew 3 little circles, perfect blueberries. The chalk nubs rolled like marbles. Around sunset, I sat on the curb and watched a kid decorate the letter M in museum with stripes. His mom stood behind him, holding a grocery bag with celery leaves poking out. Is this allowed? she asked me, a little worried. I said I didn't know, but the day seemed to be allowing it so far. The kid blew chalk dust off his hands like a magician and ran to the next square of concrete. The mom smiled, and I leaned back on my elbows. I felt full, the way you feel full after a clean meal. Nothing fancy, just something that tastes like itself. The next morning there was a note taped to the fence, folded, like a careful envelope. Please remove chalk. It stains our entrance. Management. The word management had a stern period after it. I stood there in the blue early light with my coffee, reading that period over and over. A city truck hissed past. A cyclist waved. I waited for the embarrassment to rise, but instead something else came, softer. I took the brush the old man had used and swept until the concrete turned faintly blue, like the sky had puddled there. The words blurred. New words would come, or they wouldn't. The thought didn't make me sad. It made me pay attention. On Monday, I moved the chalk lines 3 squares down, away from the brick entrance. I didn't want to fight with whoever signed their name management. I wrote, Sidewalk Museum, Traveling Exhibit. The phrase sounded bigger than the scrap of concrete deserved, which made it perfect. People found it anyway. The mail carrier saluted me with his scanner like a tiny sword. The teenage boy wrote, Made the team, in huge letters. I stood there holding the chalk and said, Nice, like a coach who had parked his clipboard for a minute. Around noon, the old man with the brush returned in a crisp white shirt. He looked at the new location, at the arrow, at the smudged remains of yesterday's show. He nodded like a contractor approving a small job. Better light here, he said. His voice was steady, a low river. Morning sun warms the stone. He brushed with the same gentle circles. I asked his name. Ray. He answered, as if the light had named him first. Ray told me he got the brush from a shoe repair shop that closed 10 years ago. They sold the last brushes and a jar of buttons, he said. I carried the buttons home like treasure. He worked with slow joy, and I realized he wasn't tidying. He was mixing the colors, stirring up clouds. Our little spot now had a sky of its own, a pale blue fog under new words. A woman from the bakery brought a tray of extra croissants and set them near the sign. She drew a tiny croissant next to the word admission. A neighbor, Mia, showed up with sidewalk crayons in neon colors. For emphasis, she said, underlining museum with electric green. A guy on a scooter parked and offered to design a better sign. He drew a neat block letter M and gave it shadow. The whole thing had a new pulse, like a small parade without a route. Not everyone liked it. A man in a suit said, You need a permit for this? His voice was half question, half warning. It's just chalk, I said, and he made a face like chalk had never impressed him. A cyclist grumbled about people standing in the bike lane while reading. A woman told me her toddler would eat the chalk if I left it too low. Fair, I said, and moved the tray up. I learned to carry napkins for croissant flakes and a bottle of water to erase the occasional slur or clumsy drawing that didn't belong. I didn't want a museum that hurt someone on the way to the mailbox. By Wednesday, people began bringing objects. A bottle cap with a star. A purple ribbon from a county fair. A paper crane that could stand on the curb without falling. I didn't ask for any of it. The things just arrived and made their own quiet case for themselves. Ray arranged them along the crack in the concrete that looked like a river. A traveling exhibit should have artifacts, he said, his eyes bright. In the late afternoon, a light breeze carried the smell of cut grass. A school bus squeaked and exhaled. A small crowd watched a kid carefully print the word home in block letters, then shade the O until it looked like a tiny sunrise. His mother, a tall woman with tired eyes, kept squeezing a key in her hand. When he finished, she touched the O and nodded. Nobody clapped, yet it felt like a room had applauded. That evening, the building manager appeared. He wasn't a cartoon villain. He was a young guy in a polo shirt with a clipboard, as if the uniform had been assigned at birth. "I've gotten emails," he said. "It's chalk." I said again, not sure why I kept repeating it like a password. We talked. He pointed to the smudges on the oldest square. I pointed 3 squares down to the new spot. He finally made a tired motion with his hand, a truce made out of air. "Keep it off the entrance," he said. "Please." He walked away, almost relieved. After he left, Ray leaned on his brush. "You handled it," he said. I didn't feel like I had handled anything. I felt like the day had softened for a second, like warm butter spreading across toast. The croissants were gone, and someone had written "Thank you" in careful cursive next to the sign. I added a new prompt. "What did you notice today?" The answers were small and perfect. A hawk over Broadway. My own patience. A corner of shade. Raspberries cheaper at the co-op. The sidewalk made a low hum. I could almost hear the city exhaling. The museum kept traveling. By Saturday, I had a folding stool and a shoebox for the extra chalk sticks, sorted by color like a classroom. I made hours up, open when the sun hits the maple, and everyone accepted that as official. I stopped checking my phone as much. I started to know who would swing by. The nurse after her shift, the dad with the little bike horn, the guy who always said afternoon, like he was stepping onto a porch. A local reporter showed up with a camera and asked me to say what it was. I told him the long answer didn't matter. The short answer was it gave me a reason to stand still. He nodded, notepad ready. Then he asked my name, and I gave it. And for a moment I wondered if saying it out loud would change the spell we'd stumbled into. It didn't. The article went up online and a few more people came by, but the museum stayed the size of the curb, which felt right. Mia organized a chalk poetry hour. She wrote the words "gentle and specific" at the top of the square, and everyone tried to write that way. A teenager wrote about the way rain smells on hot concrete. A man in a hat wrote a list of nicknames his grandmother had used for him. I wrote about the odd relief of hearing a train at night, how it meant someone else was awake and moving. Ray wrote nothing, but he brushed. One afternoon a summer storm rolled through. Fat drops, quick thunder, the kind of rain that clears dust out of corners. People ran for awnings, and the sidewalk went dark and glossy. And just like that, the museum slipped away. Colors bled into each other and slid toward the curb. The paper crane collapsed. The bottle cap rolled into the gutter like it knew someone downstream. I felt a pinch in my chest, and then I didn't. The rain was doing what rain does. I watched it erase and remix us. After the storm, the air smelled like a promise. I went downstairs with a towel and the shoebox. The maple leaves shook water down my neck. The museum square was blank, a fresh page. I set out a single stick of yellow chalk and wrote, "Opening night again." People laughed when they saw it. The kid with the sunrise drew a new sun, a little higher this time. The mail carrier wrote, "Forward." The nurse wrote, "Clean sheets." Someone drew a tiny boat on the river crack. The building manager walked by with earbuds in. He read the words, then gave me a small nod, the kind you give a neighbor when the lawn looks better than last week. That evening, as the light turned soft and the windows caught it, Ray placed his brush in my hands. "On loan," he said. "Every museum needs a curator." I told him he already was one. He shook his head. "Nah," he said. "I'm the weather." He walked home with his sleeves rolled up, showing the thin muscles of his forearms, like cables that had held up a bridge for years. Sunday morning, I woke to the sound of chalk tapping concrete. I thought it was my own hands in a dream. When I looked out the window, 3 teenagers were already there, writing and laughing, no phones out. One was shading a heart, not the big cartoon kind, but the small anatomical idea of one. They were better at shading than I was. They wrote new prompts I never would have thought of. What's something you learned too late, but learned anyway? The answers were patient. How to fry an egg. To bring water. People mean well more often than not. By the end of the day, I took the cardboard sign home and replaced it with a painted one on thin wood. The scooter guy had cut it for me. The letters were modest and square. Sidewalk Museum, admission, a memory. I hung it with 2 brass hooks from the hardware store. It swung a little in the breeze. Weeks later, when the first cool night finally slid under the door, I walked the block at dusk. The chalk lines glowed pale under street lamps. A couple stood on the newest square holding hands, reading. A jogger slowed down, placed her foot on the line, and breathed. The city noise stacked itself in the air, tires on wet pavement, music from an upstairs window, a kettle whistling somewhere out of sight. I thought about the first Tuesday, the wrinkled morning, the tiny blue line. I thought about how easy it had felt to start. I left a fresh stick of yellow chalk on the curb and wrote, "Curators change daily." Then I sat on the folding stool and watched the sign swing, watched the neighbors drift in and out like tide, watched Ray's brush lean against the fence like a flag after a parade. I didn't feel like I had built something. I felt like I had uncovered a small door in the day that had been there the whole time. You open it, you stand inside for a while, you let the sun warm the stone, and you go home lighter, carrying nothing but a smudge on your palm that looks, if you tilt it, a little like the sky.